Boom, there we go. We are live. You are looking live. Charlie Marlow, the great Eric Messersmith. This is Everybody Settle Down, another live edition. We thought we'll try it out during the day. We do it after the debates and whatnot. So, Eric, let's start like this. And of course, how are you? How you doing? But it's feeling like Trump is winning. The vibes have shifted in the last week, and it feels like Donnie J. Trump has a little bit of an advantage now. Am I wrong or what?
Well, I think you are wrong about the facts, but I think you're right about the vibes. And the
Okay.
polling on the betting odds show this. Like for weeks, Harris was a fairly solid, 55-45-ish favored after the debate. And then you saw it narrow slightly. Then a few days ago, Trump jumped ahead. And I'm looking right now on electionbettingodds.com, and it's 50.7 Trump, 48.7 Harris. Now, that's essentially a coin flip, a tie, which is what the polls are pretty much showing, which is what the election forecast models are pretty much showing. Yeah, there it is. If you're watching us on YouTube, electionbettingodds.com. So a 2.2% advantage for Trump. Look, I think people have been fighting about the election betting odds on X and other platforms and how reliable they might be and what they actually show you. To me, they're another tool, just like polling, just like election forecasts. They give you a sense of where things stand. And the thing I like about betting odds is, they're real money, right? People are actually betting on the outcome of this election rather than just making a prediction that has nothing attached to it. So I think it does tell you something. It's not the only indicator I'd point to, but it does tell you something. And to your point, I think what it tells you is what's happened is when this election is in a dull period, when not a ton of major things are happening that directly affect the presidential race, I think people feel like Trump has an advantage. Now, whether that's true or not is a different story. And then when major events happen, I think people feel rightly like Harris has an advantage. Like she kicked his ass at that debate. And so that was an event. People took that, accepted that information, and were like, well, she seems like the better candidate. I think she's probably going to win. And that's, I think, why the odds moved in her favor. Same thing with maybe her convention speech. Certainly when Biden got out of the race, we have had so many major events happen. Some of them are things that happen in every presidential race, like debates, conventions, VP choices. Some of them are things we've never seen before in our lifetime, like the sitting president deciding he's not going to run 2.5 months before the election, assassination attempts. So it's a combination of events that normally are big deals and events we've never seen before. But we haven't had any of those in a while. And no more are scheduled to happen between now and election day. Who knows what could happen, but there's nothing else on the schedule. And so I think what happens is when we get in this period of kind of a regular-ish campaign, things start to favor Trump, at least in the betting odds. The polling really hasn't moved. It's still essentially where it was 2 weeks ago, but the vibes start to favor Trump. And I think the reason for that, well, there's a couple of them. I think it goes to his overperformance of the polling in 2016 and 2020. I think people look at it and they just think, you know what? We've seen him run twice before. And in both of those elections, the voting results on election day were better for him than the October polling. And to that point, I looked today on Real Clear Politics because one of the things I really like what they do is they give you this date, what the polls were in both 2016 and 2020, what their polling averages were. And I want to be clear, I don't love Real Clear Politics polling average because they don't factor in the bias of the polling at all. Like Rasmussen gets the same weight in their average as the New York Times Siena, which is just absurd. But with that grain of salt, I think it's worth looking at as another data point. So right now they have Harris by 2 in their average. A lot of the other polling averages, yeah, there it is, if you're watching on YouTube. A lot of the other averages have Harris by 3. Nate Silver has her by 3. The Hill has her by a little more than 3. I think those are better averages. But for this sake of this discussion, 2 is the margin. This date in history, 2016, they had Clinton by 4.5, 4.6. She won by 2. So that means Trump did 2.6% better on election day than the polling on October 9th of 2016. And in 2020, they had Biden by 9.7. He won by 4.5. So that means Trump did 5 points better than the October ninth polling. So I think that is a lot of this, is people just think Trump will once again, for the third time, overperform the margin. And if he does that, he's going to win. Because if Harris is up by 3 and Trump overperforms by a couple points, that would be enough to get him the win in the Electoral College. Now, I don't think we can necessarily assume that just because this happened in 16 and 20, it's going to happen again. Maybe not. Polling errors go back and forth. Sometimes they favor Republicans, sometimes they favor Democrats. There's no way to predict that. But if you're asking me why have the polling odds changed or the betting odds changed, even though the polling really hasn't, I think that is your answer. And I also think there's one other thing. It's kind of harder to quantify. There is a sense that things aren't great in the country. Like if you just ask people, are we on the right track or in the wrong direction? It's been pretty consistently 2-1. We're headed in the wrong direction. And I think a lot of that has to do with, I keep going back to this, prices have gone up 20% in the last 3 years. And when there aren't major events in the campaign going on, like debates or, Biden leaving, something really big, people kind of go back to that fundamental. And the fundamental is they don't feel, so a lot of people, not everybody, like things are great economically because prices have gone up so much. Now, look, to be clear, I think the data has shown you that this economic recovery we have had in the last 3 years is remarkable. I mean, we got another blowout jobs report on Friday, 250,000. Unemployment still near 4%. Inflation down. We're going to get another report tomorrow, down in the 2s. Interest rates being cut. The stock market at record highs. Like if you look at a lot of the data, considering where we were in COVID and post-COVID, it's been an incredible turnaround. However, the price we paid was 20% higher prices over the last 3 years. And that is just a tough thing for the incumbent administration to overcome.
All right, I'm putting some of the comments up there, and I'm pressing 1 because I actually did Chuck. I participated in a poll like a week ago, and I was very interested in doing that. I've gotten some polls texted me in the past, and I had never participated, but I actually did about a week or so ago. So I got a couple comments off of your comments, Eric. First of all, so if we say, look, the betting odds had gotten to be about 51-49 for Kamala right up until the VP debate. And then there was a little bit of a jump, but there was more of a jump towards Trump in the last, let's say, 2-3 days. I think it's important for everybody to remember too, like even when Kamala was up 51-49 in the betting odds, that's a coin flip. Trump easily could still win. In the same way that now Trump is up 51-49 in the betting odds, that's still a coin flip. And Kamala could still very easily win. I just think it is interesting how we sway with the vibes of the polls and the odds. I mean, you talked about Real Clear. Well, look at this. Even if you're not looking at Rasmussen, if you look at just the most recent polls, okay, let's just take the 4 most recent. Harris +3, New York Times, Siena. Harris +3 is the I&I tip. Tied Yahoo, Ipsos, Harris +2. Even if those are all accurate, I mean, that's not even close to the +4.5 that Biden won with. And remember, that was still a super close election based on how close some of the states were. And I want to go to one more comment because I think this is funny. Our guy Chuck, he put this up before we even started, and I laughed. It was a good one. He says, what are you counting as momentum? I started this live stream. The title was Donald Trump has the momentum over Kamala Harris. He says, what are you counting as momentum now? Elon incels doing GameStop bets on a website. And I laugh because, Eric, I think about this all the time. I was talking to my wife about this last night. So in terms of social media, I'm on YouTube all the time, but I'm mostly creating content. So I'm not consuming as much YouTube as I used to over the last couple of weeks. I've just been very busy. So I spend almost all my time in terms of social media on one site, and that is Twitter/X. And every time I'm on X, I think Donald Trump is going to win. And it's just funny to me. It is true. And I don't care who you are, like Democrat, Republican, Independent. For years, Twitter was covertly biased towards Democrats, right? Everybody acknowledges that, I think, and that's wrong. Now X is very overtly biased towards Trump and Republicans. And you can see that just if you go on the side and you see what's trending. It's so obviously biased towards Trump and Republicans. So I think sometimes I spend so much time on X relative to other social media sites. I always feel like Trump is doing better than he actually is. I'm not saying Trump's not going to win, by the way. But if you were on X, you think it's going to be a landslide. He's going to win the popular
Right.
vote. He's going to win every swing state. And that's probably not going to happen.
Yeah, I think both media camps, whether that's social media or traditional media, or just kind of the circle that people associate with, because we tend to associate with people who think like us politically, they have their narrative spun, and there's truth to both of them. There is truth to you could create a very bullish case for Trump and a very bullish case for Harris. And that's why it's close. And I don't think that's likely to change. I think we keep looking for something to change. And I think the fact that this race hasn't really moved from Harris +3 nationally basically since she got in the race. It's teetered a little bit back and forth. And the fact that all 7 swing states in the polling averages on Nate Silver's website are within 2 points. On the Hill, they do their polling averages. They have them all within 1 point. All 7 swing states are so incredibly close. And here's the thing. Swing states tend to break together. Like, it's possible it could be a 4-3 split. That is certainly possible. It wouldn't shock me. But I think it's more likely that one candidate or the other wins 5 or 6 of the swing states. That's what usually happens. Look at Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. I've said this before. They have gone together in 8 straight presidential elections. And in 7 of those 8, they've all gone to the Democrat. The one year they didn't, 2016, they broke together for the Republican. I don't think that's a coincidence. These tight states, especially if they're geographically or demographically similar, are likely to break together. And that is why you have to give Trump a chance. Now, so I don't know if I'd say he has momentum. I just think his momentum, nothing's really changed dramatically to make you think he couldn't pull this out. And I think you made a really good point about probability. And, look, I'm a Nate Silver guy. You know this. He makes this point over and over again, but I still don't think it's gotten through to a lot of people. Let's say the betting odds are right, okay? And Trump is, and I don't think this is true. I still think Kamala Harris is the slight favorite to win, my personal opinion. But let's say the betting odds are right, and if you round up, Trump is a 51-49 favorite, right? A week or two ago, Harris was a 53-47 favorite-ish. That's almost no difference. Mm-hmm. So some people will say, oh, that's a big difference because now Trump is in the lead. It's been a coin flip. It remains a coin flip. And think about it this way. If I told you had a 52% chance of winning a bet, and I told you had a 46% chance of winning a bet, in your mind, you may think that's a big difference. But if you understand probability, that's almost no difference at all. It's basically the exact same thing. Now, when you start getting above 60-40, and especially when you get to like 70-30, then that is a big difference. That is a materially significant difference. But 55-45 or anything closer than that, it's the same thing. It's a coin flip.
I want to get this comment up from our guy, Errol Spence Jr. He says, don't you find it crazy how Trump has the top 2 issues favoring him, economy and border, and he isn't ahead by like 3 points? If this was a normal Republican like Haley or Youngkin, they would be ahead. And look, Eric, you and I said this all through the primary about Nikki Haley or Ron DeSantis. By the way, I want to get to Ron DeSantis later because I was watching a press conference from Ron DeSantis, and he owned this press conference on hurricane recovery. And I'm thinking to myself, where was this guy during the primary campaign? So we'll get to that, but I want to, because you and I agree too much. So I do have something I want to argue.
Let's
with you with,
because fight.
And it's not even a real argument. But you said that all the swing states, may fall together. I agree with you on the blue wall. I do think the blue wall versus the Sun Belt, little different, right? Like it seems like Kamala, everything we've seen on Nevada for a long time is leaning Kamala, right? So I guess it wouldn't surprise me. Let's just say Kamala wins all of the blue wall states. Trump wins most of the Sun Belt. And I'm including Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona. Again, we'll see with Nevada. it seems like that's leaning Kamala. But for the second time, I'll bring up a conversation I had last night with my wife. We were talking about 2016. We're talking about the blue wall. And don't get me wrong, Trump has certainly taken a huge percentage. And if you look at the demographics, we're talking about white, non-college educated, the working class, the union votes that used to be just ridiculous margins to Democrats. Donald Trump has taken a nice percentage of those. And I think that's a big reason why he won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan back in 2016. But let's also remember, Hillary Clinton totally took the blue wall. She totally, what am I looking for? She basically just, she assumed she was going to win the blue wall, right?
Yeah.
Like whatever the reports were that she hadn't been in Michigan or Wisconsin to campaign for weeks or months, right? She took them for granted. And so that's something I don't think the Democrats or Kamala or anybody will ever do again, right? So I think when we look back to why Trump won in 2016, we have to remember that like the Hillary campaign and the Democrats made some really bad mistakes that I don't think they're ever going to make again. Like they're never going to not campaign in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin down to the wire, literally till election day. We have to remember that too.
It shows you the improvement in data too, just over that 8-year period. Because in 2016, they were wrong on their data. Like they didn't just not go to Wisconsin because they didn't feel like it. They thought they had it in the bag because that's what their numbers were showing them. And they also thought Iowa would be close. They invested heavily in Iowa when they lost Iowa. So it just shows you. And look, that could happen again. I mean, it is possible. One of these other 43 states we never talk about is a major surprise. But I think it is highly unlikely. It would take a blowout election one way or the other, I think. So almost certainly these 7 states are going to decide it. Everybody knows what they are. And that's kind of why I think I would still favor Harris, is because the tradition of the blue wall, 7 out of 8, as I said, last 8 elections, they all have gone Democrat. And again, that's all she needs. If they do split, all she needs is Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. She can lose the other 4, and that gives her exactly 270 electoral votes, assuming she wins the 2nd congressional district in Nebraska, the Omaha district, which I think she will. So she has a little bit more margin for error in the swing states, I think, than Trump does. That's number one. But also, number 2 is her ground game. She has raised way more money than Trump, and she has spent way more on paid media this month of October and also on ground game. Trump's campaign made a strategic, there's been some reporting on this, they made a strategic decision to not invest as much in the ground game. That's why Elon Musk has been critical, because his outside group has been funding some of the ground game. Because Trump was basically like, I can get the ground game myself. What I want to spend money on are election lawyers ready to challenge results. And seriously, they have spent a ton of money on that, and they will be ready to do that. And you know that will happen should he lose. In terms of the top 2 issue point that was about immigration and the economy, it is true that Trump is ahead on those. But I think it's very important to look at the margins. They are dramatically lower than they were when Biden was in the race, or even when Harris first came in. I mean, when Biden was in the race, Trump was up double digits on both of those issues. Big leads. I mean, on immigration, I saw polls earlier this year. He was up by like 20 points. That is not the case anymore. If you look at the polling now, the economy is basically even now. And immigration, Trump still has a slight lead depending on which poll you look at, but it's in single digits. And at some points, that's almost even. And the reason for that, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, it's tribalism of our politics. No matter what the merits of any issue are, it's always by election day probably going to be close to 50-50 on who's better in that election. Just because, like, if you love Harris, okay, and you're going to vote for Harris, even if you don't love her, if you just like her better, you're probably going to say she's better on the economy. And vice versa for Trump. Like, the one issue that defies that is abortion. There are a lot of people, clearly by the polling, who are going to vote for Trump but think Harris is better on abortion. But in most of the other issues, it's settling back to where it was always going to be, which is close to 50-50. The other reason, too, is, as I pointed out, on the merits, the economy looks way better than it did 6 months ago. If you're just being fair, like, inflation has continued to fall off a cliff, the rate of inflation over the last 6 months. The Fed cut interest rates. That didn't happen 6 months ago. The stock market keeps setting record highs. Mortgage rates have finally started to go down. Pretty much every economic indicator is trending in a good direction, and that has just continued for 6 more months. And so if you're just being fair, you would expect the Democrats would be doing better on the economy because the information has gotten better. Now, because of our filtered media, that information doesn't always get through, right? So there's a lot of Trump voters that probably don't know some of the things I just mentioned because they haven't seen it in the media they consume. So it's not 100%. There's always going to be people. Like, the economy could be absolutely perfect right now, and you would have a large number of people who are Trump supporters who would say the economy's terrible. That's just the reality of our politics. So if you're being fair, gas prices too, as Doug points out, gas prices have fallen. Pretty much every economic indicator is trending in a good direction. It has been pretty solid now for months. Those are just the facts. And so I think that's why the economic issue has been neutralized to some degree. And on immigration, I think
hold on.
Trump. No, go ahead.
No, I think Doug was disagreeing. I'm guessing, Doug, let me know. I think Doug and people on the Trump side will say, yes, they're going down. They're not nearly as good as the prices were. They'll say before Biden. I think most people will agree it's before COVID. But they're going to say, yeah, of course they're down, but we were paying $2. Now we're paying $2.75 for gas, whatever it is. Our insurance has gone up. Grocery prices have come down from the peak, but they're still not as good as pre-COVID or pre-Biden.
Right. No, that's true. It's absolutely true. And that is why, as going back to my earlier point, the fundamental thing that I think is helping Trump when we're in a neutral environment. But remember, on prices, look, we talked about this before. Prices are never going back down. The rate of inflation has come down dramatically, but across the board, prices aren't going to be cut on everything in the economy unless we have a recession. That is how you get what's called deflation, which is prices across the board going down, is when your economy is so bad that people don't have money. Right. The last time we had extended deflation in this country, well, we had it a little bit in the 70s and we had it during the Depression. I mean, we don't want to go back to those times. Right. So you're always going to have some inflation. The question is, what is the rate? And gas prices is one of those examples where Trump gets credit for things that he doesn't deserve credit for. Let's just be honest. In 2020, the reason gas was $2 a gallon is because nobody was on the road. Gas prices are determined
or in the air.
Or in the air. Nobody was flying. Nobody was driving. Gas is driven primarily by supply and demand. The demand in 2020 collapsed. So to compare the gas price today versus the height of COVID is just wrong and irresponsible. And even with gas prices, yes, they're higher than they were in COVID. They've been going down. Look at gas prices over the last year and a half.
For sure. Okay. I want to talk about, and so do you, about the Kamala media blitz, but let's talk about the Hurricane Helene and now Milton recovery and the politicalization, if that's how I say it, of that. I want to criticize some people, and I want to also credit some people. First of all, with the Democrats, I think Biden is acting presidential when he's talking about, hey, DeSantis and we're cooperating. Kamala played the politics game a little bit there, and I thought that DeSantis, I watched an entire press conference of him, and he basically said, look, we're getting everything we need from the federal government. He's not acting like Trump, who's saying, people are only getting $750, which is a lie. And it's horrible when you think about it, because maybe there's some people in North Carolina that aren't going to go to FEMA and try to get more money because they think they can only get $750. DeSantis is surely not being like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I think is saying that either Jewish space lasers or the Democrats are literally, they have a hurricane machine that they're creating, and somehow it helps Democrats to ravage North Carolina and Florida right before an election, and then the Democrats get criticized for their response, and somehow that helps Democrats. I don't know, but Trump is an idiot on this, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene is an idiot on this. So I'm bashing two Republicans. I said Kamala's not good on this. Biden is better. He's actually being a president, which you should during a disaster. But I want to credit two Republicans because Brian Kemp from Georgia, I was watching Fox News last night. I like to switch back and forth sometimes. I actually watch cable news more sometimes to kind of see the biases. I kind of get a kick out of that. Sean Hannity totally tried to bait Brian Kemp into throwing the federal response under the bus. And Kemp basically just said, look, we've gotten everything we need. And that's, I've always liked Brian Kemp. It doesn't matter. He's just a reasonable, normal Republican politician person, right? In the same way, DeSantis owned this press conference on Hurricane Helene recovery. He owned this one reporter that was trying to get him into a political battle. And I was like, man, this dude, he looked strong. He looked like he was running the show. And I'm like, where was that Ron DeSantis during the primary when
Yeah.
he just trickled away or faded away without even being a factor? So DeSantis to me is leading the way you should. Um, Cooper is leading the way you should. Kemp is leading the way you should. I don't even know who's the governor of South Carolina. I apologize, but
McMaster.
okay, there you go. I like when we see, especially in a tragedy where people are dying, like I understand it's going to be politicized, but like you got to put this aside for the big stuff and just let the people get their help. Let the federal response be what it is. I'm not saying it's perfect. Everybody's trying their best at the state level. Everybody's trying. You have just normal everyday citizens running helicopters and trucks. Like everybody's doing the best they can to try to make this horrible situation better.
Yeah. First of all, on DeSantis, look, I think what you're seeing again with DeSantis, we've seen it over and over again, is the difference between governing and campaigning.
Yes.
He's great, especially if you're a conservative. He's great at governing, right? In terms of, and what I mean by that, I'm not saying I agree with every one of his positions. I mean, he's great at these press conferences. He's good at passing legislation. He's good at leading. But that is a completely different skill than campaigning. Some politicians are really good at both. Some are good at one or the other. DeSantis clearly was not good at campaigning, especially for president. Maybe he will be again. I think he's very likely to run again in the future. In terms of the governors, you're right. This is the thing that undermines Trump's arguments about FEMA the most is the Republican governors that have come out and said the feds are doing what they can do. And look, part of that is this is one of those rare instances where the interests of the Republican governors, primarily in the South, are aligned with the Democratic president, Democratic administration. Because if it wasn't going well, it's not just the president that's going to get the blame. It's the governors as well. They would get maybe even more of the blame than Biden would. And Biden's not running for re-election again. Some of them are, right? And so that is interesting that their interests are aligned. I want to be clear. I'm not saying that's why they're saying what they're saying. I think they're telling the truth, but their political interests are aligned in a way that Trump is now not aligned. So Trump is being undermined in his arguments. But his arguments, the problem with Trump is a lot of times he goes to ridiculous extremes right away because he's grasping for any issue that he can use to bludgeon the Democrats. That's clearly what this is. I mean, the Hurricane Helene thing, just in the last few days, these are misrepresentations I've seen from Trump. Talking about money being diverted to immigration from the FEMA Hurricane Relief Fund. That's not true. That is not true at all. They are different pots of money
funds
within a large organization. And here's the thing, the Washington Post pointed this out. The president who actually used money earmarked for disaster relief for immigration was not Biden. It was Trump. Trump actually did this in 2019. They took money out of the disaster relief fund and they used it for immigration detention at the border. So not only is he wrong that the Biden administration is doing it, he is the one who literally did it. So that when you say something that ridiculous and that easy to fact check, it completely undermines your argument. FEMA has money for now. That they're not completely out of money. They will eventually run out, especially with this new hurricane coming. And another thing was the $750 thing. FEMA's giving $750 to people. Trump said that's all they're getting. That's not true. That's an emergency amount of money in the short term. They'll be eligible for a lot more down the road. And then there are the really ridiculous conspiracy theories that you see online that are just like FEMA stealing money. I saw this one the other day. FEMA is literally taking over a town because it has lithium deposits, and they're taking over that town to funnel the money. And these things are laughable, but people believe these things.
A lot of people believe them.
Look, Trump did not invent conspiracy theories, but this is one of his legacies. This is yet another area. And I'm not saying he's saying all of these things. He's saying some of them. But it just allows people to believe these things that aren't true. And social media and algorithms fuel it. And Republicans, congressmen, governors have come out and said, this is not true. I mean, look, what happened is you had a very rural area of the country that is already not great in terms of access. Some of these towns had one road leading in, and many of these roads were completely destroyed. Mm-hmm. So these towns had no entry point other than by air. That's a disaster. I mean, on top of another disaster. And it's awful. And I think what's true is there's always room for improvement in any response. from the government or anybody else. But between the government, state, local, federal, between the private charity organizations, everybody's doing the best that they can. And that, I think, is the truth of what's happening on the ground. But, of course, with Trump, he just can't help himself. And then it feeds in to this bigger machine that he doesn't even have control of. That is this conspiracy theory machine that you see largely online.
I think he likes it, though. I think he knows about it. I agree with you. I was pissed. I remember when I was on the radio, the whole thing about the 600. Remember, it was $600 for the Maui victims. And that's just not true. Again, that's the emergency. It's the immediate fund for food, clothes, baby formula, if you have to get a hotel. And if folks don't believe me or Eric, literally the FEMA website is very easy to navigate. You can go, I've had to deal with FEMA, like not on this level. I'm talking for flood insurance for some rental properties. But like if you, and I'm not saying it's always the easiest thing to work with. And I'll go off on a tangent. I had to get flood insurance for a second story condo that was next to a creek, or as I call it, a crick. That doesn't seem like we really need flood insurance for a second story condo next to a crick. I digress. My point is, anybody, if you want to debunk some of the BS, you can literally go to the FEMA website and it says right there what you can go ahead and apply for. And it's much more than the $750 immediate fund. Okay, Eric. Well, here, I'll tell you what. HB Card says, are there truly any undecided voters? Hard to believe there are. You know, I thought back a month or so ago, or a couple months, when RFK Jr. aligned with Trump, I thought he had a decent enough percentage that would maybe flip some people that would vote for him to Trump, whatever. But then also, I do think that Kamala having such a short campaign, right? Even though she was the vice president, people that really only pay attention to the presidential election, like I think there's a lot of people that maybe even still don't know about Kamala. Like that's why we need debates. That's why we need more than one debate. Don't you think there's some people that were probably on the fence with Kamala and then they saw her do really well in the debate? And we're like, oh, okay, maybe, hey, look, here was this candidate who didn't have a good 2020 primary. She flamed out. She was a not super visible vice president. She had very low approval numbers as a vice president. And then she was essentially gifted the nomination because Biden stepped down. And everybody's like, okay, well, guess what? Whether you like her or not, she has overperformed that bar. But I do think a lot of people were like, well, look, unless you're a hardcore Democrat, there are some people in the middle, they're moderates, independents, who are like, well, I want to at least see what Kamala has first before I vote for her. So I don't know. What do you think? I think there's actually more undecided voters this time around than the last couple election cycles because of the RFK factor and because of Kamala having like a 60, 70-day campaign just sprint to the election.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there are more, but there are definitely some, to HB Card's question. Like you see it in the polling. There are people who say, I'm not sure, or who kind of lean toward one candidate but can be persuaded. And I don't think it's a big percentage at all of the electorate at this point. I think it's 5%, maybe at most 10% that could change their mind or be persuaded. But a lot, you got to remember, like, you and I are nerds about this. Probably a lot of people on the live stream right now are really into this. That is not everybody. Far from it, right? There are a lot of people who will vote on November 5th who pay very little to even no attention to politics, but will vote. They are into video games or taking their kids to soccer practice or, watching Netflix, crime dramas, whatever, but not politics. And so they catch a little bit here or there. And look, those are the people that are going to decide this election most likely, are the kind of low information voter who doesn't really know a lot about the issues, but kind of votes on vibes or feelings or something they heard someone say. Like, that those people are out there, and, for better or worse, they're probably going to be the people that pick the next president. How do you reach those voters? Well, I think Trump is smart and his campaign is smart, and they've done a lot of podcasts geared toward young men people who are influencers.
Mhm.
They've done a Twitch stream here or there, like trying to get these people who may be predisposed to you but aren't really into politics. Kamala is finally doing some of that with the Howard Stern interview, the Call Her Daddy podcast, Colbert. Like, these are the things I think Harris should have been doing at least weeks ago, if not months ago. But yeah, they are out there. There's no question. The undecided, and also the people who maybe have soft support for one candidate or the other. I think the thing to remember too is Trump has never broken 47%. In his two
Right.
runs, he's been at 46.3, 46.8, I think, were his two percentages in 16 and 20. One he won. One of those elections he won, one he lost. But at both, he had almost the same percentage of the vote. And if you look at the average right now on Nate Silver's average, he's at 46, which is exactly where he's been. It's crazy to think all that has happened over the last 9 years, that this is, and look, high floor, low ceiling, that's Trump. So can he, if he finishes in between 46 and 47, I think he will lose, because the third party vote, which helped him in 2016, but disappeared in 2020, now that RFK Jr. is out, I don't think it will be there. I think all the third party independent write-in candidates will get a total of 2-3%, similar to what they did in 2020. So I think to win, Trump's going to have to break through that 47%. And we'll see if he can do it or not.
Okay, let's talk about the Kamala Media Blitz. I want to start with, you mentioned some of the young men podcasts that Trump and Vance went on. We're talking like Nelk Boys, which is Full Send. We're talking the All In podcast is a bunch of very smart Silicon Valley tech guys. What else? Theo Vaughn. We've seen Trump and JD Vance do a lot of those. Now, Kamala's not doing any of those, right? I think she should. But I tell you what, Mark Cuban is kind of going on all those shows as the Kamala surrogate, for better or for worse. She's going on Theo Vaughn. She's going on the All In podcast, and she's trying to get to that audience. I'm sorry. Mark Cuban is. Mark Cuban is going on those podcasts and trying to speak to that audience for Kamala. And then, so this week, you mentioned Howard Stern, The View, 60 Minutes, Call Her Daddy. It seems like the 60 Minutes interview, the clips, I didn't watch the whole thing. Couple of clips I saw, she was okay. Couple of clips I saw, she was not good. The View, do people really watch The View? Does The View get good ratings? So it does?
I think so. And it's
I'll tell you what,
culturally, the thing is, it's culturally significant because you often see the clips from The View pop up elsewhere.
And then Call Her Daddy, I know a lot of people were, again, people on the right are going to rip on that. That's the number 2 podcast in America, behind Joe Rogan. It's huge with young women. I know the woman, I think her name is is it Alex Cooper that hosts that? I've never really watched it, but it's kind of like a sex podcast, but you also have to meet the voters where they are, and that's where young women are. And look, I will just say this. I try to be fair. A lot of people are saying, oh, why do you go on this sex podcast? She'll have porn stars on and all that. Well, so does Full Send. So does Theo Vaughn, right? Like, it's kind of pop culture fun stuff. The same porn stars and kind of eclectic people that maybe Alex Cooper, is it Alex Cooper, whoever? She interviews a lot of those women. Well, Full Send and Theo Vaughn, they're interviewing the same women and the same guys who are kind of fun in that industry. So it's not like, oh, you went on a sex podcast. Like a lot of these podcasts, I mean, Joe Rogan, look at Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan talks about everything, whether it's from UFC to politics to sex to everything going on in the world.
Yeah, I think Harris should have been doing this. I've said this before weeks ago. I think her and her team have done really well considering they were thrown in at the last minute. But this is my biggest critique. They should have done more of this. This is exactly the right strategy. Going on some of these non-traditional friendly media, just like Trump has done, to try to reach those voters we're talking about who aren't super tuned into politics. I think she was she's done fine I haven't watched all these interviews. Like you, I don't really consume The View, but it's popular with its people. I didn't listen to the Call Her Daddy podcast, but I did watch the 60 Minutes piece, and she was fine. It was your typical politician, but I think she could have been better, and she could have been sharper on some of her answers, particularly on how she would pay for the proposals she's made, on some of her flip-flops in the past. And I think it's a lack of reps, and that's why she should have been doing this earlier. Now, look, better late than never. I want to be clear, and now is the time. If you were only going to do these interviews one time, October's the time to do it, because that's when it's most likely to reach these undecideds. But I really feel like she would have been better off, and her campaign would have been better off. Once they did the Dana Bash interview, I think they should have followed that up with some of these other lighter interviews. Because look, Trump and his campaign criticized her a lot, but that's what he does mostly. It's almost exclusively friendly media. That is the world we live in now. And I don't like it, by the way.
Right.
I think part of the two things have happened. Number one, our media environment has been completely fractured. So now you used to have the big networks, the cable news channels, the big newspapers, local media, and that was pretty much the media ecosystem. Now, of course, it's the Call Her Daddy podcast. It's The View. We have expanded it to an enormous degree. But the other thing, too, is more and more both sides have their preferred media. And the incentive of that media is to be nice to their side for access, for ratings, to cater to their audience. And so it becomes this cycle where we split further and further apart. And so now candidates don't do unfriendly media for the most part. I think they should here or there.
Me too.
I think Gavin Newsom going on Fox is very good for him. And I think Pete Buttigieg does great as well. I think,
Yes,
and vice versa. There are J.D. Vance, I think, I think part of the reasons he performed well in that debate is he was used to hostile questions from media that wasn't as friendly. And so I think I think it's a bad sign for our democracy that the presidential candidates basically, with a few exceptions, stay in their media silo. And even the one thing that can kind of bring them together, which I know Trump bashes the networks, but if you watch the 60 Minutes piece Monday, and I did, as they pointed out, for over half a century, 60 Minutes has interviewed both of the major party presidential candidates in October of an election year since 1968, since Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey. This is the first time that didn't happen. And it didn't happen not because of Kamala Harris, because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump initially committed to it and then backed out and then said, I need an apology for CBS for the Leslie Stahl interview in 2020. He just didn't want to do it. And here's the thing. I think that's bad for democracy, as I said, but it's also kind of weak from the guy whose one of his main arguments was, my opponent won't do media. She won't sit for the tough interviews. And here you are with a chance to be on the same venue as her. It would have been separate interviews, but the same show with the same people asking the questions, and you backed out of it after you had already committed. I mean, that's really weak. It's really weak. And then Trump had the gall to go online and criticize her performance in the 60 Minutes report interview that he backed out of, saying it was edited, which has he never watched 60 Minutes before? Every interview they do is heavily edited. That's what they do. They don't brand themselves as like a podcast format where you just talk for an hour and a half and it's shown as if it's live. That's not what they do at 60 Minutes. Of course they edit the answers for clarity and for time. So I just thought it was really weak on Trump, but I think it speaks to an even bigger thing that goes beyond Trump, which is the party separating in such a way that they won't even talk or reach out to the base of the other party in the media that base consumes. And I think that's bad for our country.
Yeah, the one answer, and it was pretty silly when you saw Whoopi Goldberg like smiling. And again, I'm going by clips, just so you know. I do not watch The View ever. And I'm proud to say that. But like Whoopi Goldberg was looking at Kamala, and she was doing it on purpose. She was kind of acting, but it just came across very cheesy. And then that woman, Sunny, I believe her name is. I don't know all the. It's now like all these shows are like NFL pregame shows. They have like 10 people.
Yeah.
Like why do we have 9 people on a show? But anyway, I think the woman's name is Sunny.
Could you name the cast of The View for $1 million right now?
All of them? Okay, yeah. I know it's Whoopi. I know it's that Latina woman who used to be on Anna Navarro. She used to be on CNN. Maybe she still is. Sunny is the attractive kind of, I think, light-skinned woman. They have the woman who used to work with and for Trump, right? But now she's like,
I don't remember.
She's like
her name.
Normal. I don't even know if I think she's just like a normal person who used to work for Trump and now is against Trump. But I think she's still a Republican.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't remember her name though. And then there's like 2 more. Oh God, Meredith, isn't her name? Anyway, we can't do that. You and I would lose the $1 million.
Right. But this Sunny asked a question, which I thought was a very good and fair question and I just want everybody to know, I didn't watch the whole response. This is where I'll admit, like, I'm consuming this on X. She asked Kamala, basically, what would you do differently than Biden? And they did cut it off. So maybe I should go back and see if she went further. but she kind of said there was nothing to do differently. She even said, I was with them. I was in there in all the big impactful decisions. And I'm like, the strategy needs to, I know you can't throw Joe Biden under the bus. Although if I'm Joe Biden, I would say throw me under the bus, right? Like for the good of the party.
Right.
Like, why doesn't Joe Biden take one for the team? If
Oh, and
I'm Kamala,
I think Biden gladly would do that.
right? Like,
I think he would volunteer to do it.
so on immigration, how how come Biden and Kamala should get together and Kamala should say, look, the first 2-3 years it was really bad. I was the one that stepped forward this year and said we have to change this. Like she could throw, I'm kind of half joking here. She could throw Biden under the bus on the really bad immigration policies of the first 3 years and say, this year I was the one that stepped up and I actually secured the border. But my point is, Kamala has to do the dance of she has to attach herself to the positives of the Biden administration and try to separate herself from all the negatives of the Biden administration. And in this very short clip, I didn't watch the whole thing, but look, let's be real about the media landscape. A lot of people only see this small clip on Instagram or X, and it
Yep.
really looked like she was totally attaching herself to Biden, and that's not the best strategy because there's a lot of Biden policies that a lot of people don't like.
Yeah, that question of her media blitz in the last few days where she's been all over the place, that's probably been the question and answer that's broken through the most because of the clips.
Yeah.
Where she was asked that question and her quote was, nothing comes to mind. That's
Okay.
what she said. And here's the thing. This to me goes back to the lack of practice reps because that's a pretty obvious question in some
Sure.
form. And so you should have a little bit better answer than that. Like again, I watched some of her interviews. She's overall fine. She's nowhere near the disaster that Trump makes her out to be. And I'll tell you what, he's, I would say, worse in interviews than she is. He can't keep a single train of thought on any answer. But she leaves some answers on the table. There's no question about it. And I think it's a lack of reps. Like, for instance, how could you answer that question if you practiced it, right? Because you know it's probably coming. You could say something like, well, Joe, I have agreed with the policies of this administration and supported them. But going forward, I have a little bit different view. And in fact, I mean, it's a small one, but literally one that her campaign has put out is she has a different plan on taxing capital gains and unrealized gains. She has a much lower proposal to do that rate than Biden did. That's a difference. She could come out and say, look, I have a difference in how I would tax unrealized gains. And I believe in the premise, like Joe Biden, of taxing the very, very wealthy in this country. But here's how I would do it a little bit differently. You could talk about those kind of things, talk about spin it forward to your plans. Like, I have a child care proposal that goes beyond Joe Biden. I have a tax credit proposal that goes beyond what Joe Biden has proposed, because these things happen to be true. And so you could go to those things, and that way you're still, because look, there's no way you can untie yourself, for better or worse, from Joe Biden. I mean, you've been his vice president for 4 years. So you want to embrace some of the things that have gone well in the Biden administration, the accomplishments. But I think there is an area there to straddle that line a little bit better. And I think that it just shows, A, that she's not Barack Obama. We know that, right? But B, they haven't gotten the reps that she should have had to practice so that she is ready to nail a question like that is coming. Because if these interviews are pretty good across the board, or they're fine, but the one clip that most people see is you saying there's nothing you do differently than Biden. That's the world we live in today. It just is. Most people are not going to sit down and watch the 30-minute interview, or I don't even know how long the Howard Stern one was, probably an hour plus. Most people are not going to do that.
I also saw a tweet, and this is where I admit I just see a lot of this stuff on X, but it basically it showed how many viewers and listeners all these shows had. And it was Howard Stern, it was Call Her Daddy, it was Stephen Colbert, it was The View. And I mean, look, whether you like those shows or not, huge audiences, some of those audiences, obviously, young women, she maybe wants to hit a little more. And then like Howard Stern. Okay, I know Howard Stern has really become more openly liberal lately, but I would think that traditionally Howard Stern has a pretty white dude audience, I would think. Maybe it's changed. I don't know, but maybe there's some persuadable voters there. So, I mean, yeah, this was the media blitz she needed. I think we have a month out, so she could probably still do it again, right? Like, don't you think she's going to wait here, see how the polls go next week? She'll probably take next week off from some interviews. And if she feels like she has to do a bunch more, she'll probably do it 2 weeks from now. I mean, like, the election is close, but it's not that close. Like, we still have a full month, and God knows what with October surprises, what's going to happen. But then you also just wonder, like, I mean, on the margins, you can change people's mind. Like, but like, Eric, what could happen to Donald Trump that would change people's minds, right? Like, there's been so many scandals,
Yeah.
like nothing personal, no personal scandal. I know you
No.
mentioned. So, what's the thing with the Putin COVID tests?
Oh yeah, well, Bob Woodward, legendary Watergate reporter, has a new book coming out, and in it, he is reportedly saying that Trump sent COVID testing machines to Putin at the very beginning of the pandemic when we didn't have testing. He sent them to Putin, and then they kept it quiet. And Trump, of course, has denied this and said it's false. But Bob Woodward has I would say, a pretty good reputation in the world of journalism, not just from Watergate, but he's written a lot of books about the Bush administration, about the Obama administration, that had a lot of inside accounts. I mean, people talk to Bob Woodward. So I would tend to believe this story and not believe Trump's denial. Remember, Trump said he never slept with a porn star. He said he never disparaged the military, even though
Well,
General
hold
Kelly
on.
said he did.
Did they actually go to sleep though? Think about that. They probably didn't sleep.
That's a good point. So technically, he's telling the truth.
And it
No,
was
you're
quick.
right.
It was quick, I heard.
I stay. Yes, that's what Stormy Daniels told us. I'm glad we have that information. We got that visual in our head. But I think that, look, it's just another thing that just shows you who Trump is. He's a guy who, at the beginning of COVID, when we have limited testing facilities or testing machines, is sending them to his buddy, allegedly, Vladimir Putin, one of the enemies, like arch enemies of the United States.
Okay, when I heard that though, and again, this is where I think part of the reason I think our podcast works, in theory, in my mind at least, is you do all the research, and I am the person that comes with the 20-second clips. But I unfortunately think I represent a big population of the country that only sees this election sometimes through those 30-second clips on X or Instagram or Facebook or whatever. But when I heard the Putin story, the first thing I thought of was like, so Vladimir Putin, he's probably got food testers. Every story you see, like you see him at the table, he's 50 feet away from the next person who's trying to kill him. Like, even if he trusts Donald Trump, you really think he's trusting those COVID tests? I mean, are they for his personal use, or was it for his? Okay.
No, the report was these were for Putin's personal use, not like to help the people of Russia. Yeah.
Okay. Because if I'm Vladimir Putin, anything coming from America that I have to put up my nose, I'm not trusting. Like, I'm thinking there's some type of cyanide on that's trying to kill me or something.
Well, look, from his buddy Trump, though. I mean, come on. John says Trump is going to win, guys. He could have gone to Diddy's party and have video. He's going to win. Yeah, that would be the October surprise, wouldn't it? If the Diddy videos come out.
Okay, I was thinking about this too. How did Diddy survive the Me Too movement, and then 5 years later they get him? Like, everybody on earth got Me Too'd, even if you didn't even do anything wrong. Like, if you had a bad date with someone, they're like, yeah, he didn't walk me to my car. And then Diddy somehow survives it, but maybe is the worst of anybody, right? I don't know.
It's crazy how that's the great scandal with Diddy getting off track here, is how did he get away with this for so long? But I think to the October surprise thing, it's kind of like, there's nothing that I can imagine. Of course, then again, if you would have told me in like the Hunter Biden laptop and what was on there, if you would have told me that in like September of 2020, I'd have been like, that sounds crazy. But sure enough, it happened. So you never know. But I think these hurricanes could be, sadly, because they're tragic, the October surprise. We talked a lot about Helene and the recovery, but we're recording this on Wednesday morning. And by the time you hear this, Milton probably have made landfall because it's coming Wednesday night. But if it is what they project it to be, it's going to be absolutely devastating. I mean, the Tampa area has not had a major hurricane hit it in 100 years. And 100 years ago, nobody lived there. Now there's 3 million people in the Tampa metro area that are in the direct path of this monster hurricane. So maybe the response to this, which is why, Trump's trying to grasp at anything he can, and why I think it's important for Harris that she cut her campaigning short once this makes landfall and head to Florida, later in the week. Is that optics? Sure. I mean, does it really matter at the end of the day if Kamala Harris is on the ground versus if she's not? No. But optics matter. And when the election is this close, it's not going to take a massive event to swing it. It might be the hurricane response. It might be Israel and Iran if they go to war. It might be any of these things that on their own aren't going to move a ton of votes, but when the margin is this small, it could matter.
And when I say this, I was going to say half jokingly, but I just think even though Kamala is not the incumbent, she represents the incumbent party and Biden. And I think, again, if you get back to vibes, there can even be this vibe of like, and this is nuts, but it's like, why are there all these hurricanes, right? You know what I'm saying? Like, and there's always hurricanes. But what I'm saying is like, I think anything that goes badly, and I'm talking about the economy, I'm talking about natural disasters, I'm talking about Israel, Palestine, I'm talking about Ukraine. I feel like anything bad that happens hurts Kamala and helps Donald Trump. And I know that's weird to say because hurricanes, it's the weather. And I disagree with Marjorie Taylor Greene that Democrats and Jewish space lasers are not creating these. But I do think that anything bad gives the right fodder to attack the federal government and the response. And you hate to parse it like this because it is a tragedy that's going to kill people. But I actually think from an electoral process standpoint, I do think it helps Trump.
Oh, absolutely. And on the flip side, good information or good events can help Harris. Like, for instance, last week,
Sure.
the dock workers on the Gulf Coast went on strike, and there were estimates that that was going to cost the economy up to $5 billion a day, that it was going to lead to empty store shelves, that it was going to raise prices because we couldn't get the things we need, the component parts for cars, food. And that looked like it could have been a major disaster, which would have hurt the incumbent administration and Harris by default. But they settled it in 3 days, and now they're back to work. That was a win for Harris because that could have been a major issue if it had dragged on. Also, the jobs report. I talked about this again. That came out Friday. 250,000 jobs, 100,000 more than expectations. Unemployment rate down to 4.2%. That helps her. The inflation numbers will come out tomorrow. That could help her. So you're right. Everything, and again, any of these things on their own are not moving many voters, right? But when it's this close and the margins in some of these states, maybe tens of thousands of votes, any of these things could happen. Israel is very likely. There was reporting today that Netanyahu and Biden spoke on the phone. It appears Israel is very close to retaliating against Iran for that ballistic missile attack last week. If that happens, and it's fairly contained, and Iran says, okay, we're good, and doesn't respond, looking at through the political lens, that's a win for Biden-Harris because it doesn't escalate into a major war. But if, on the other hand, Israel launches a massive attack on Iran that destroys their nuclear facility or their oil fields, and Iran then fires back, and Israel responds, and now these two, major powers are at full-throated war with each other, that is bad for the current administration because that contributes to this sense of, well, the world is in chaos. Now, again, these things are nuanced and you could get into a long debate about them. And of course, what's most important is the lives of the people on the ground, just like these hurricanes, but would be naive to not think that they matter in a political world. And that's why Trump seized on the Helene thing so quickly, is because he knows that anything you can do to bludgeon the Biden administration by default hits Harris too, and maybe slightly increases his odds of winning.
All right. I know you have a hard out here. You have a couple minutes before we got to bounce. Anything else? We're almost to an hour. Do you have your notebook that you want to empty?
Yeah. I mean, look, I wanted to go back to the 60-minute show because it wasn't just the Harris interview. I watched the whole show. That was the first half. The second half was a piece about the director of elections in Maricopa County, Arizona, which is where Phoenix is, where I think 60% of the population of the state of Arizona lives. And what happened to him after 2020? He's a Republican, and he was a big Trump supporter. And he looked into these conspiracy theories about the election, many of them centered in Arizona and in Maricopa County. And he realized they were all bullshit. And he went out and said that. And he was like, look, I wanted Trump to win. And what happened to him was he was booed. He was followed to his car, death threats, And it wasn't just him. It was the Republican supervisors on the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors, people showing up to their meetings, berating them. People have been arrested and imprisoned for the death threats. And to this day, and 60 Minutes interviewed one of them, you have people who still believe this stuff, that the last election was stolen, and they want to make sure this one isn't quote unquote stolen, even though there was no evidence. And they will say or do anything. And that is, let's be honest, that's because of Trump. If Donald Trump had conceded the election, if he had just said, hey, we came up short, I looked into fraud, I thought there might be some, there wasn't, these people wouldn't be getting these death threats. People wouldn't be riled up and ready to do the same thing again in 2024. But that's where we are. And you and I haven't been on the air since the Jack Smith report, and this will be lost in the shuffle, certainly by the time we get to Election Day. But it became public that new indictment Jack Smith made against Trump in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling. And look, whether or not it should have been public is a separate debate. But one of the things that struck me in there was when they came to Trump on the day of January 6th, after he sat there in the dining room for hours watching it, didn't lift a finger to do anything. And they told him that Mike Pence had to be removed because the mob was looking for him and might try to kill him. And his response was, so what? So what? That just one of the details that came out of there. And I was watching that Arizona worker, and I'm thinking, you know what? People were probably watching 60 Minutes for the Kamala Harris thing, and she was okay, whatever. But the most damning thing of that 60 Minutes show about this election had nothing to do with Kamala Harris. It was that Republican worker, election official, who, by the way, in his primary this year lost because he had the courage to actually stand up and say, look, there is no fraud. They did recount after recount in Maricopa County. They found like 10 ballots or 50 ballots out of millions that had a problem. And they weren't all for Trump or Biden, right? You're always going to have a small amount of human error in any vote tabulation. But that piece was so damning for Trump. If I were the Harris campaign, I would just take that and put that into an ad, because that just shows you not just what he is, but the movement that he has spawned of these people who, the woman who was there, who was leading the effort, she said she believes God has called her to do this now. God has called her to try to steal an election that already happened and maybe try to steal another one. And that is what has been unleashed. And at the end of the day, like, I care about issues, man. I do. I'm a nerd about some of this policy stuff. I think but that to me is what this election is about. That is the central theme, I think, of this election. Of, do we want a country like that? Or do we want a country where Republicans, Democrats can just say, you know what, we looked into it, the election was fair?
Well said. And let's end on that note. My 3-year-old son's back. Maybe you can hear him. He's crying. He's hollering. It's all good. We got to go. Eric, great job. Thank you, everybody, for watching, commenting. If you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button, and we will be back next week. Everybody settle down. Charlie Marlow, Eric Messersmith. Eric, we'll see you, buddy. And see you, everybody. Thank you. End stream. End stream.